So I don't know about you guys, but this is a little bit of a culture shock this year. Oh yeah, children's church. All right, you got it. You know what you're doing. Your kids, you know the routine. It's a bit of culture shock because we spent, I think I counted 37 weeks in Ephesians, like going line by line, just a little bit of time, and then all of a sudden we're like doing a book a week almost. So it's been an interesting transition, even just thinking about preparing every week. Like I just kind of open up, I'd dive in, I'd zero in on those verses, I'd diagram them, I'd look at the verbs and the nouns. It's like a little chunk is really easy, and now it's like, what do you do with the whole book, and how do you go with that? And so I think the first thing that's helpful is to kind of get an overview of what's going on. And so we're gonna watch a video. It's 7 minutes from I think it's the Bible Project is what it's called. And we'll probably watch a few of these throughout the year because it really, it's hard to just dive into a book. I don't feel like I can do it justice. And they have cool drawings. So I think hopefully that'll help us. And then I'll kind of give you like, an oversimplified wrap up of how we can dive into a little bit of 1 Samuel this morning. So.
The books of 1 and 2 Samuel. They're two separate books in our modern Bibles, but that division is due simply to scroll length. It was originally written as one coherent story. We're just going to cover the book of 1 Samuel in this video. So after Israel was rescued from slavery in Egypt, they made a covenant with God at Mount Sinai and eventually came into the Promised Land. And there Israel was supposed to be faithful to God and obey the covenant commands. Before the book of Samuel, Judges showed how Israel failed at that task big time. It was a period of moral chaos, and it showed Israel's need for wise, faithful leaders. The book of Samuel provides an answer to that need. The book of Samuel's story focuses on three main characters: the prophet Samuel, where the book gets its name, and then King Saul, and after that, King David. And all three of them transitioned Israel from a group of tribes ruled by judges into a unified kingdom ruled by King David in Jerusalem. And the book of Samuel has a fascinating design that weaves the story of these three characters together in four main parts. Samuel, he's the key leader and prophet in the first section of the book, but then he also plays a key role in the next section, which is Saul's story, and it's told in two movements: Saul's rise to power and then his failures. And the second part is about his downfall and his tragic death. And then the drama of Saul's demise is matched by David's exciting rise to power. And then David's story is told in two movements. First, he rides the wave of his success, followed by his own tragic failure and the slow self-destruction of his family and then his kingdom. The book concludes with an epilogue that reflects back over the whole story. So let's dive in and see how this all unfolds. Part 1 picks up from the chaos of the book of Judges, and we're introduced to a touching story about a woman named Hannah. And she's grieved because she has never been able to have children. And by God's grace, she finally has a son named Samuel. And in joy, she sings this amazing poem in chapter 2. And the poem is all about how God opposes the proud and exalts the humble, about how despite tragedies and human evil, God is working out his purposes in history. And also it's about how God will one day raise up an anointed king for his people. Now, Hannah's poem has been placed here at the beginning of the book to introduce these key themes that we're going to see throughout the whole story, like the next one. Samuel grows up and becomes a great prophet and leader for the people of Israel, at the same time that the Philistines rise to power as Israel's arch nemesis. And in this crucial battle, the Israelites get arrogant, and instead of praying and asking God for help, they trot out the Ark of the Covenant as this kind of magic trophy that will automatically grant them victory in battle. And so because of their arrogant presumption, God allows Israel to lose the battle and the ark is stolen. So the Philistines, they take the ark and they place it in the temple of their god, Dagon. And then the God of Israel defeats the Philistines and the god Dagon without an army by sending plagues on the people. And then the Philistines don't want the ark anymore, obviously, and they send it back to Israel. And the point of this little story seems to be this: God is not Israel's trophy, and he opposes pride among the Philistines, but also among his own people. And so Israel needs to remain humble and obedient if they want to experience God's covenant blessing, which opens up into the next large section. The Israelites come to Samuel and they say, hey, we want a king like all the other nations have. Go find one for us. And so Samuel, he's kind of ticked off and he goes to consult with God. And God says, yes, their motives are all wrong, but if a king is what they want, give them one. And so we're introduced to the figure of Saul. Now, Saul is a tragic figure because he begins full of promise. He's tall, he's good looking, he's a perfect candidate for a king, but he has deep character flaws. He's dishonest, he lacks integrity, and he seems incapable of acknowledging his own mistakes. And so these flaws become his downfall. He wins some battles at the beginning, but his flaws run so deep, he eventually disqualifies himself by blatantly disobeying God's commands. And so the aging Samuel confronts Saul and Israel. He had warned the people that they would only benefit from a king who's humble and faithful to God. Otherwise, the kings of Israel will bring ruin. So he informs Saul that God is going to raise up a new king to replace him. And so Saul's downfall begins, as God at the same time is working behind the scenes to raise up that new king. It's an insignificant shepherd boy named David. He's the least likely candidate to be king, but the famous story of David and Goliath shows that God's choice of David is not based on his family status, but simply on his radical and humble trust in the God of Israel. And so this story embodies all of the themes of Hannah's poem. Proud Saul and Goliath are brought low, while humble David is exalted. From here, we watch Saul slowly descend into madness, while David rises to power. So David starts working for Saul as a general, and he's winning all of the battles, and he's also winning all of the fame. And so Saul gets jealous, and he starts chasing David around, hunting him, trying to kill him. David's done nothing wrong, and so David simply runs and waits in the wilderness. And here we see David's true character. He has multiple opportunities to kill Saul, but he doesn't. He simply trusts that despite Saul's evil, God will raise up a king for his people. What's interesting, too, is that many of the poems of David that you find in the book of Psalms are linked to this very period of his life, and they all express the same attitude of trust. And so this section of the book ends with Saul coming to a grisly death after losing a battle with the Philistines. 1 Samuel tells some of the most intricate, well-told stories you find anywhere in the Bible, and the characters Saul and David, they're portrayed very realistically. And the author's putting them forward as character studies so that you can find yourself in them. So in Saul's story, we see a warning. It's crucial that we reflect on our own character flaws and how they harm us and other people. And with God's help, we need to humble ourselves and deal with our dark side so that Saul's story doesn't become ours. David, on the other hand, is presented as an example of patience and trust in God's timing in our lives. And so he's running in the wilderness, being chased by Saul. David had every reason to think that God had abandoned him, but that's not what he thinks. And so David's story encourages us to trust that despite human evil, God is working out his purposes to oppose the proud and to exalt the humble. And that's what 1 Samuel is all about.
He talked about looking at David as like an example and also Saul as a warning. And so I want to compare those a little bit. And I'm going to give you an oversimplified premise this morning, which you can shoot holes in all week long, and you enjoy that. But my premise is this. There's three sort of phases or things in life that we can identify. At any point we should be in one of these phases, but the trick is to know which phase we should be in and what we should be doing. And if we can get that, it will help us to know to respond in any given situation. So here are the three that I've narrowed it down to, and we'll look at them. Prepare, wait, or act. And I think we see all of these in David and a little bit in Saul. Prepare, wait, and act. Before I dive into that, just think about flying. Flying, there's a stage of preparation. Even I'm talking about just getting at the airport. You're preparing for takeoff. You're storing your luggage in the overhead compartments. You're putting on your seatbelt. You're getting the safety instructions. They're checking the plane. They're refueling the plane. These are important things to do in preparation. And then after that, you wait. Sometimes you sit on the tarmac, or sometimes you sit there until you get the okay from the radio tower to go onto the runway. And then it's time to act, to move down the runway and eventually take off. Now think about what happens in that scenario if you act when you're supposed to wait. That's called a plane crash. You have two planes on the same runway. That doesn't work. That's the whole point of radio control tower. Acting when you're supposed to wait is not a good idea. What happens if you act first and then prepare? Well, you've got luggage bouncing all around over the place. You probably didn't refuel the plane. Not a good thing. You don't know if the plane is maintained or not because you didn't take time to do that before you left. What happens if you wait when you're supposed to be preparing? Well, that's called wasting time. There are times where we have to wait, but there are times we should be preparing. So when I think about that and I think about my own life, I think a lot of times it's not, am I doing the right thing, but am I doing the right thing at the right time? And I think we could even see that in Saul's life as we do that comparison. So let's look at just a few snapshots in the book of 1 Samuel. If you want to follow along with me, I'll try and not make you jump all over the place. I've tried to just pick out a few in 1 Samuel to follow. So let's start with prepare. David, how did David prepare? Well, 1 Samuel 17. If you grew up with any sort of children's Bible stories, this would be in it, because it's David and Goliath. There's people who haven't been in church for years or ever who know the story of David and Goliath. It's kind of well known. But I want to, in that moment, there's a lot we could do in that story, but if you want to turn 1 Samuel 17, verse 33, this is right when David's talking to King Saul and David's response, and that's what I want to kind of zero in on here. We're looking at how David prepared. 1 Samuel 17, 33. Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant was tending his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went out after him and attacked him and rescued it from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God." And David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." So when David was growing up as a youth, even still as a youth, he had these opportunities to prepare. And by facing these wild animals, bears and lions, he was protecting his sheep. And those gave him confidence that God would give him the strength and the wisdom and the knowledge to defeat anything that was attacking his sheep. And so he would go after them. And so now when he sees this mighty giant of a man, he is not afraid because he's had that opportunity to prepare. But there's another preparation there, which is actually kind of in that same story. It's just being a shepherd in general. And by David growing up as a shepherd and tending those sheep and watching after those sheep actually prepared him to be a king. He was learning how to watch after those who have gone astray and keeping them safe was allowing him to be a good king in the future. And we just get to the very beginning of that at the end of 1 Samuel. But you can see that coming. There's a spot, you don't have to turn to this one, but if you've been reading along, and I know a number of you have mentioned you have in our reading plan, and if you haven't started yet, it's not too late. There's still some copies over there. You can read through the whole Bible throughout the year, or a chapter a day. You'll get kind of snapshots. Either way, you'll get a good idea. In 1 Samuel 25, David that's the point he was talking about. He was like hiding from Saul. Saul was trying to kill him. He's hiding in the wilderness. And David, as he's hiding, he's kind of in the wilderness. He's got this band of men around him. And there's this guy Nabal, who's a real loser. And David is protecting this guy's sheep. And so he goes to him and he says, "Hey, I've been protecting your sheep." And his wife saves him. And there's a longer story there. But my whole point is that even they weren't David's own sheep. It just was in him because he had this preparation as a shepherd. This is this is what it means when there's sheep around me, I'm going to protect them. And so now he's looking after someone else's sheep because he's in the wilderness. And why wouldn't he do that? Let me extend that blessing to him. And so you see it's just a way in his life that he was preparing. Now, when I look at King Saul, we actually don't know a whole lot about his preparation. We don't have a lot of his sort of childhood stories or thing about that. We do know, if you want to go back to 1 Samuel chapter 9, the very beginning, verses 1 and 2, that people liked him as a king because he was tall and good looking. And might not be the best way to select a king, quite honestly. In fact, when I just think about presidential candidates in America, now everything is televised and there's a lot of visual images. And I think presidents in the past probably never would have become presidents if it was now. Abraham Lincoln is a great example because he's a pretty comely looking guy. He was not really that attractive. And I don't think that he would have made it through the television era. So how are we selecting, our leaders? In Saul, 1 Samuel 9, it said there was a man of Benjamin. He was the son of Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zerah, a lot of sons, son of Benjamite, a mighty man of Valor. He had a son whose name was Saul, a choice and handsome man, and there was not a more handsome person than he among the sons of Israel. And from his shoulders and up, he was taller than any of the other people. And so there's Saul, and we say, okay, we don't know a lot of, what does that say about his preparation? Not a whole lot. Now, I don't want you to read into this too much because it's dangerous to make an argument from the absence of something in Scripture. But I do know that the one thing we know about Saul is there was a time he lost his dad. Well, I know it was him, but his father's donkeys were lost, and he was sent to go get them. And that's where he actually encounters Samuel. And he was looking for him for days and days with a servant. So he had help looking for days and days, and he actually never found them. Went to Samuel looking for help, and Samuel said, "Oh, the donkeys have returned. Don't worry about it. Go back to your dad." But I just made me wonder, like, would David ever have let that happen? Like David was like going after sheep and taking after bears and lions with his bare hands, and Saul lost a couple donkeys for days and never found them. So anyway, I don't know, but I just think of it this way: like, if you were going to hire someone to watch your animals, would you hire Saul or would you hire David? Just from what we know from Scripture. I mean, so again, I'm not saying a lot of those preparation because we don't know a lot about it, but it just seems like he was not, even in his childhood, was not as prepared as David was. So prepare. Okay, what does wait look like in these guys' lives? The key that I want to point out in waiting is that of humility. It's waiting with humility. And we see this a lot in David. So chapter 18, everything I say is in 1 Samuel this morning. Chapter 18, we encounter this time. Now David has kind of gotten a name among himself, and everyone likes him, and Saul doesn't. But Saul kind of is like, well, maybe, I don't really get this, but maybe I'll make him my son-in-law, and then I don't know why that would, because you don't like your in-laws, I guess. Maybe that's how that works. But in 18 verse 17, I'll start there. Saul said to David, "Here's my older daughter, Merab. I will give her to you as a wife, only be a valiant man for me and fight the Lord's battles." For Saul thought, "My hand shall not be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. We'll let someone else take him out." And David said to Saul, "Who am I? And what is my life or my father's family in Israel that I should be the king's son-in-law?" And so it came about at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, she was given to someone else. And now you got Michal, the next daughter, and she loved David. When they told Saul, the thing was agreeable to him, and Saul said, "I'll give her to him, that she may become a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him." Man, this is a typical father-in-law right here, isn't it? All right, so then Saul said to David, "For a second time you may be my son-in-law today." And Saul commanded his servant, "Speak to David secretly, saying, Behold, the king delights in you, and all his servants love you. Now therefore become the king's son-in-law." In other words, he's trying to convince him. It's like, hey, you should do it. Not for good motives, but he's convinced. So Saul's servant spoke these words to David. But David said, "Is it trivial in your sight to become the king's son-in-law, since I am a poor man and lightly esteemed?" And they reported those things back to Saul, and Saul said, All right, that's good. The king does not desire, verse 25, any dowry except 100 foreskins of the Philistines to take vengeance on the king's enemies. Now Saul planned to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. He thought, surely he has to go out and kill 100 Philistines. That'll take care of him. And the response, if you see that, when his servant told David these words that pleased David, he's like, okay, I can prove my worth there. And before the days expired, he went up, he struck down 200 men. That's twice of what was asked of him, and delivered it. So here we see David saying, no, I can't even be your son-in-law. Like, I'm not even worthy to be in your family. There's a sense of humility. He had already had victories and successes. The people had already liked him. It would have been really easy for him to just kind of jump in and say, no, this is for me. But he did not take it into his own hands. He did not take the kingship into his own hands. And you see it if you keep following throughout his life. He waited on the Lord's timing. If the Lord wanted him to be king, the Lord was going to do it. He wasn't going to have anything to do with it. So just think about this. David becomes anointed as king after Saul kind of messes up. And Samuel says, no, actually God told Samuel, we're doing something else. And he anoints him as king. And he doesn't actually, from the time he's anointed as king to the time he becomes king is about 15 years. David's walking around with God's anointing on him for 15 years without actually getting to be king. And during that time, all the people loved him, including Saul's own son, Jonathan, and Saul's own daughter, Michal, his wife. They all loved him. In the wilderness, as mentioned there, David had at least 2 opportunities to kill Saul. All of the people around him were saying, you should do it. God is giving this to you. You should do this now. And he refused to do it. And even after he became king, when all the tribe of Judah accepted him first, and then the rest of the people were kind of hesitant, he never once said anything bad about Saul. He took care of any survivors that were around. He spoke of Saul with respect and honor. He made the people mourn. If you remember, it was at the very end of 1 Samuel, the story, someone came up, it might have been 2 Samuel. Anyway, someone came up and said, they were reporting the news, hey, Saul is dead. And they were reporting like joy, and King David said, how can you report this with joy? And he had him killed. This guy thought he was bringing good news. He refused to let anything bad be said about the person who hated him the most, because he had that sense of humility. He was waiting with humility. If God's going to do it, God's going to do it. And I'm not going to get in the way. Waiting for God's timing and not my own. That's hard for us. We're kind of a take control kind of culture. Make your own destiny. If you want it, go and get it. It's the American dream. You can have it. But David did not live that way. He waited. Now, what does that look like with Saul? Saul, in the beginning, actually started out well. I'm going to go back to chapter 9, verse 21, just one little verse I want to mention. When Samuel told him he was going to be king, Saul's reply was, am I not a Benjamite, the smallest of the tribes, and my family the least of the families? Why do you speak to me this way? He's like, I'm from a really humble background. I shouldn't do this. But the thing is, his humility didn't last. So he started out right, but it didn't last. And so in chapter 13, you get to this place where they're ready to fight the Philistines, and before they do it, they make an offering to God. They ask God to go with them and to bless their battle. And Samuel was the one who was supposed to do that. And Saul's waiting for him. But he didn't wait long enough. He stopped waiting. And he said, you know what? Instead of humility, he presumptuously said, well, I'm the king. I might as well be the prophet and the priest too. I can do it all. And he made the sacrifice. And it did not go well. That's actually part of what caused him to lose his kingship. He did not wait when he was supposed to wait. He acted instead of waiting at the wrong time. So, prepare, wait, and then thirdly, act. When it's time to act, act. And David was a man of decision and action. As you're reading through his story, the entire account of David is him acting. So I don't necessarily need to highlight any of them. There's actually the one that stands out to me, and I'm cheating a little bit, it's in 2 Samuel, but where he didn't act when he should have was the whole incident with Bathsheba. And what happened that one time when he wasn't acting when he should have? We have adultery, we have murder, we have just the grieving of a whole nation because of not acting at the right time. But for most of his life, other than that one exception, you see him acting when it's time to act. But I want to zoom in on one instance in particular. If you want to turn to chapter 30, 1 Samuel 30, the very end, well, towards the end of the book. And this is David still in the wilderness. He's still hiding from King Saul. He's hiding at the place of Ziklag. And he's actually fighting for non-Israelite people and just trying to win friends in that way. And as he's out fighting, all the people he's fighting for, all their family gets stolen. His women and wives and children all get taken off in a caravan. So I'll pick up in 1 Samuel 30, verse 3. When David and his men came to the city, behold, it was burned with fire, and their wives and their sons and their daughters had been taken captive. Then David and the people who were with him lifted their voices and wept until there was no strength in them to weep. Now David's two wives had been taken captive, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess and Abigail the widow of Nabal the Carmelite. And moreover, David was greatly distressed because the people spoke of stoning him. For all the people were embittered, each one because of his sons and his daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. When there's times to act, there are times when things aren't going to go well. And there are ways to respond, and you just see a few ways to respond there. The people, first of all, and David included, just responded by being bitter, just mourning, and just being destitute, and just feeling like you can't act anymore because you're just so angry at what's going on. But then the people, even beyond that, was they wanted to blame. Things aren't going well, let's blame David. Let's stone him, this faithful leader we've been following this whole time. Let's kill him. It's his fault. And David, instead, turned to the Lord. He responded by looking to the Lord for his strength, even when everyone was against him. And that's not a surprise. Weaving back to where we started, 1 Samuel 17, David said this, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine." Same thing. He turns to the Lord for strength. He did it when he was a youth. He did it when he was hiding in the wilderness from King Saul. When it's time to act, it's time to act. What do we see in Saul? Well, let me just, if you remember right when he became king, it was supposed to be confirmed, 1 Samuel 10. He's hiding in the baggage. They're supposed to confirm him for king, and he's hiding. It's time to act. It's time to step up. He's been anointed as the king. The people want to make him king, and he's hiding. We encounter the Philistines. The whole Goliath scenario. You've got all of Israel lined up. You've got all the Philistines lined up. It's time for battle. It's time for the king to be the king and lead the charge. And what is he doing? He's waiting. He's waiting for someone other than him to fight this guy because he doesn't want to do it. And no one else wants to do it. We see him waiting when he should be, or not waiting when he should be, with a sacrifice in Samuel. So he's not acting at the right time. And then towards the end of his life, his actions, instead of going after Israel's enemies, he's going after his personal enemies. King David, he's spending all his energy trying to get David when other people are attacking Israel. His actions are not in the right place. He got it all wrong. He acted when he should have been waiting. He waited when he should have been acting. Instead of preparing, he was acting and waiting. So what does that mean for our lives? Which phase should you be in now? That is, I think, the ultimate question. If we answer that question right, we will be following the Lord well. And if we answer it wrong, we will be out of turn. What phase should you be in now? Should you be preparing? Now, athletes and musicians get this. The time, if you add up all the time practice and preparation and training for athletes and musicians, they're doing way more practice than the little bit of time where you get to see them perform. That practice is not flashy. Often nobody knows it's even happening. They're doing it on their own in rooms that no one else can hear them. But if they don't do it, we can tell on their performance when you have to go to one of those concerts and you wish you weren't there. The way that we prepare makes a difference. Are you in God's training program? Are you allowing Him to prepare you? Are you doing the little things now that maybe no one even sees, maybe no one even notices, so that you're ready to do the big thing? And I don't know what that is. Whatever that big day is that God might have for you in the future. We should not be waiting when it's time to prepare. Is that the phase that you should be in right now? Teresa on Wednesday brought up this verse, Hebrews 5:14. Read it many times, but I saw it in a different light on Wednesday. Hebrews 5:14 says, solid food is for the mature, it's talking about believers, who because of practice have their senses trained to discern good and evil. And I never realized that. What the writer of Hebrews is saying there is that we're supposed to have solid food as we mature in Christ. As we grow, we should be more and more mature believers. But where does it start? Because of practice, our senses get trained to discern good and evil. In other words, our senses, what we take in our ears, what we take in our hearing, what we take in to our thoughts, we have to train those senses so that they can discern good and evil. Every little day decisions we make, the preparation is preparing us for the bigger decisions down the road. Is that the phase we're in? Is it preparation? Maybe it's the phase of waiting. And I would add waiting with humility. So I ask you, what's your view of yourself? You look around and you think, I've got this. Why? Just wondering, why has no one else noticed how good I would do at this? Why is no one else noticing that I'm spectacular at this thing? Do you think everyone else is holding you back and slowing you down? That's not the kind of waiting God is calling us to. The opposite is just as bad, though. Are you hiding in the luggage when God is calling you to come out and lead and serve? There is a season for waiting, and there's a season to step out of waiting. And we have to be in the right season. But here's the thing about waiting on the Lord. This is going to be painful, but it's not about us. It's not about if we feel like we're the best candidate, or if we feel ready, or even if we feel like we're qualified. The only question is, did God ask us to do it? And if He did, then we better do it, regardless if we feel like we're qualified or not, or even if we think we're going to fail miserably. Even if we do fail miserably, are we responding to God? And if He didn't call us, then we had better keep on waiting. Even if we think the person who steps up and does it is a doofus or incompetent or isn't doing a good job, we had better keep waiting unless the Lord tells us to act. But then there will come a time, maybe we're in the phase, it's time to act. It's time to act, to step out. And I don't have any instruction on acting other than obey the Lord and act. But I do want to ask the question of when you are acting, when you're stepping out, and when things don't go well, where do you look? Where do you find your strength? You could blame others, you could wallow around in bitterness, or you could strengthen yourself in the Lord. I want to close by sharing this passage out of the New Testament with you from 1 Peter. I feel like it encapsulates these three phases really pretty well. 1 Peter chapter 5. 1 Peter 5, at the end of this letter, Peter writes this: Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that He may exalt you at the proper time, casting all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. Be of sober spirit. Be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. but resist him, firm in your faith. Prepare. Peter says, be on the alert. Be firm in your faith. That doesn't happen in the moment. It happens before the moment happens. I've heard it said that the worst time to decide whether or not you want to be pure is when you're in the back seat of the car with your boyfriend, girlfriend. It happens before. Prepare. Wait. Peter says, humble yourselves that he may exalt you at the proper time. And so we have to wait for the proper time. And then act. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. It's a call to action. It's not a call to passivity. Prepare, wait, and act. If we ask ourselves which of those we should be doing and then do the right one at the right time, I believe it will greatly assist us in every aspect of our lives.